Welcome, author and editor Megan Tady. Yay!
Thank you for having me.
Well, and Megan, I'm so thrilled you get to join the show because I know, like we were just talking about just a second ago, that you've been kind of busy with a book tour with this awesome debut that you have. So, in case listeners don't know, can you tell them a little bit about yourself and your writing?
Yes. So my debut novel is called Super Bloom, and it came out on May 2nd. It's my first book. Super Bloom is about a massage therapist named Joan Johnston, who's about to get fired from her job at a spa in Vermont. And she's grieving the loss of her love. And she's got one chance to save her job, and that's to get a glowing review from just like the world's most demanding client, famous romance novelist Carmen Brons. Carmen breezes into town and sets Joan, I will just say, in a new direction without giving too much more away. And it's funny and tender and, all the things that I love reading in fiction. And my day job is I run my own writing and editing business called WordLift, which I've been doing for about 12 years now.
Yeah. Well, and I bet that helped too with a little bit on the writing side, right?
Yeah. My whole life has been steeped in writing and words from when I was very young. I loved to write. My grandmother gave me a typewriter when I was 8, and I would peck away and write these little stories. And I joined the journalism staff when I was in high school. And then I went to journalism school and was a freelance writer and journalist for many years, and worked in the nonprofit world as a writer. So every part of my professional life and early passion was writing. When it came to writing a novel, it was a completely different beast, and I had a lot to learn, but I could string a good sentence together. So that was helpful.
And that's what I've heard from authors who are also editors, is that sometimes when they're writing, they have to turn off their editor brain in order to really write the story and give it the due service it deserves.
Yes, yes, that's so true. And I was also really used to writing, nonfiction, writing stories and quoting people and not making things up. So that was new for me, and learning story structure. And then once I was in the story, and it was in it for many years, I couldn't see where I was going wrong. And, we might get into this at some point, but I ended up tapping freelance editors along the way to help me, because I did feel like I was I had my blinders on and I couldn't see where were the threads. What was I losing? What was not working? They call it the messy middle in the middle of a novel. And why was it strong in the beginning, strong at the end, but not in the middle? And I was working on figuring that out.
I love that you mentioned that too, because I think sometimes as authors, especially if we're writing our debut, like our first book, a lot of times we get into it and we think it's just going to flow, right? It's just going to come out of us. And then we hit that, like you said, the messy middle. And then we're just like, well, we have to bring in help. And it's great to bring in that help too, because sometimes you need it. You can't see the forest through the trees.
Yes, it's really true. And I think, we kind of get hit with these overnight success stories, whether it's a writer or anyone. And so we imagine that that's what it might look like for ourselves, that we're going to write this book. It's going to be fast. We're going to get swooped up right away. And if that doesn't happen for us, then it means that we don't have the skill, we don't have the talent. But what I think we don't hear about as much is the actual real toil and grind and rejection that goes into so many books and to being an author. And the idea that a lot of authors actually have either one novel or many novels in a drawer, and that's actually quite normal. It doesn't mean you're not good at it. It just means that you're learning, you're learning as you go. And that was quite a humbling experience for me. I kind of went into it thinking, I'm just going to, writing comes pretty easily to me. So I'm just going to knock this out of the park, and I'm going to make some agent's day, and we're going to be off to the races. And that was not my experience.
Well, and you bring up a fabulous point because with your debut novel, Super Bloom, congrats, by the way, the novel explores themes of hope and grief and rebuilding a life. And I heard this book had a winding and unexpected path to publication, from draft to from what we see now at this final version. How long did it take, and what did that path look like?
It took about 8 years. And it's not because I was sort of like writing every single day on it, but the idea for the book hit me when I was getting a massage at a spa in Vermont. My husband took me on a surprise trip, and I had my face in the face cradle, and there was a body worker working on me who was pretty grumpy. And I was sort of like, what's her story? What's going on with her? Oh my gosh. I began to cast her as a character, and the whole novel was sort of flowing through my head. And I walked out of that experience thinking like, maybe I could write a novel. I had started dabbling with fiction, but I didn't know if I had it in me. I didn't have the confidence. I just sort of thought like, who am I to write a book? Which is an experience I give to my character, Joan. And, I was taking some writing classes locally, and I worked on the novel for about a year. And then I queried agents and was like, okay, we're doing this. And I had a couple of referrals from friends, and I just thought it was going to be quick. I heard nothing from no agents. I didn't get any responses. And I was like, oh, okay, I have a lot to learn. And that just set me on this path. And at the same time, I was running my own business full time, and then had my two kids who are now 4 and 7. So they're still quite young, and really writing the book around the edges of my life for a while, like half an hour here, an hour on the weekend. So it was slow going. It wasn't until I think 2019 that I got really serious again about the book. Like, okay, I'm going to really buckle down. I'm going to study fiction in a different way. I started taking more writing classes. I started reading about story structure. I was years into writing this novel, and I'm only just looking at the 3-act structure and citing incidents. Not that my book needed to be cookie cutter how other books were, but I needed to know, why were these breakout novels a success, and what works and what doesn't? What are the rules, so that I know why I'm breaking them or not breaking them? I formed writing groups. I started listening to podcasts on how to really query an agent. Like I was just doing all the right things, and it was still slow. I got 15 full requests from agents, and I'm thinking it was the fall of 2019 going into the pandemic, but no one offered representation. And that's when I brought in another freelance editor to say, look, I'm hooking people with my query letter, with my opening pages, but something's not holding. And what is it? At the same time, I got a beautiful rejection from my now agent, who said, I think you have a stakes issue with your character, and I can't figure it out, meaning the stakes aren't high enough for her, and I don't know how to crack it. So I'm reluctantly passing. I cried. And then I took it to my writing group and was like, ladies, I have a stakes issue, and it's those, sometimes you just get rejections that are form letters. And sometimes you get these little kernels that give you some insight into what's not working. And it's so helpful when you get that from an agent. So I think I worked on it for another 9 or 10 months and went back to her again the following fall and said, hi, I know this is uncommon that they'll read it again, but would you take a look again? I took your advice, and I think I cracked it. And she said, I'm so happy to see you back. Yes, send it to me. I sent it to her. 4 months go by. And, for, writers who are listening and are in the query trenches, it takes a long time. You have to be really patient. 4 months went by. And at the same time, I was watching Zibby Owens start her publishing company. And I've been listening to her podcast and seeing her grow her, media empire. And I was really impressed. I had a connection to her, a referral to her. So I sent my manuscript to her unagented. And 6 weeks later, she and her team and my incredible editor offered to acquire my novel. And I went to that agent and said, I have a book deal. And she said, "Give me tonight." So she read the book overnight, and it all came together in 1 week, and it was a total dream. But it took a really long time to get there, and a lot of rejection and self-doubt along the way.
What a fabulous opportunity you had to get like feedback from an agent. Because like you said, sometimes it is just a form letter of, thanks, thanks, but no thanks of that. But I love that you had the wherewithal and the tenacity to take that piece of feedback that you got and then just said, okay, how do I make it better? Because I think sometimes all we hear is the negative as an author and we don't know what else to do with it. Right.
Yeah. And it's okay to sit in that for a little bit. I mean, it's rejection on any level is so hard, especially when you've put this so personal, and they say it's not personal, but it is so personal to the writer. And you do feel the rejection as it's just not good enough. And you think that it is, and you can't figure it out. But what I started to really hear over and over again is that the writers that are on our shelves today are the writers that persisted. They're not even always the best writers. They're the ones that faced a lot of rejection and just said, I still want to keep going and I'm going to keep trying, whether they put the novel away, which is what I considered doing for a while, or they get the feedback and keep going. And it is hard, but I'm so glad. I keep kind of thanking earlier versions of myself that I didn't give in to that, because it's really easy to do.
You mentioned that you didn't want your book to be cookie cutter, and that is not at all how I would describe the book. So how many versions, like from like the first version to the final version we see out now, how many edits did that take? Like, how different did that look?
That's a great question. I like to print my books out, my versions out as I go, because I like to read them sort of spiral bound. And I think it's like, it's a huge stack. I think that the kernels, the essence of what I was going for, are still very much here. And even, lots of sentences and things like that. But it changed a lot. And I don't want to call them mistakes, but I decided to change the tense. I changed, it was third person. I went to first person, which are laborious things to change in a manuscript. I cut a character. So there's just so many things that I changed, and it got stronger as it went. Super Bloom, it's a nested book. So you get a novel within a novel, and you get to see what my character Joan is writing. And for a long time, I was just describing what Joan was writing to my readers. And my writing group came back after reading those pages, and they said, this is boring. We're so sorry to say it's not engaging us. We want to see what Joan's writing. Don't just tell us, show us. And I was so bummed. I was like, gosh, I'm years into this thing. This is the last thing I want to do, is write this little itty bitty novel within a novel. I know that hooking readers on one book is already hard. And now I have to hook them again. Different novel, a slightly different voice. And I just didn't know if I could do it. I'm so grateful I had a writing group. I'm so grateful that they gave hard feedback. That's hard to hear, because I went back, I worked on those pages. It did so much for the book. And it really allowed me to sprinkle in all these details about Joan's past romance without getting bogged down in backstory. And honestly, it gave me a little more confidence in my own skill as a writer. So, but that wasn't always in there, so those things kind of develop as you go along.
Well, and I think when I wrote this question, that was what I was most curious about, is because you did have the novel, like you were saying, the novel within the novel, which I was just like, you did it so seamlessly. And it did tell me so much about Joan and her headspace and like her as a character, writing almost this self-insert romance for herself. Like it was so interesting. And like I said, you did it so organically. I almost feel like it was always a part of the book, but I felt like it wasn't, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I'm so glad it's working. I know that sometimes that can kind of alienate readers because they're already invested in a story and now they have to turn their heads to someone else. But I'm so glad I did that. And I think writing books, I keep hearing, feedback from readers, like, I read your book in a day, or I read it in a few days. And writing books that are super fast and easy to read is challenging. To make it seamless, to make it feel like it's just effortless is quite hard. But I'm so glad that people are having that experience while they're reading the book.
I had the same kind of experience because I found myself like, okay, I have like 10 minutes before my kiddo gets out of school. So I want to kind of read what's happening next. So it was one of those books that's just like a wonderful, heartwarming, journey of self. And it's a great beach read. Hilarious, so much more funny than I expected it to be, and I found myself giggling. So it was, you did so well balancing all of that. And I found, did the comedy bits come organically? I always ask that because I know sometimes comedy is really hard to write.
Yeah, I love writing funny. It comes organically. And in fact, one of the things that I had to work on with my editor was de-funnying the book, because sometimes it was like joke, and that is tiring for a reader when it's so witty that you kind of are like, and you just are waiting for a different type of emotion. So we wanted to be really strategic around taking the reader on an emotional journey, whether you're laughing or you're feeling like you might cry, and that the calibration had to be right. So it couldn't just be pages after pages of jokes. So we kind of went through the manuscript and said, what is really landing? What are the jokes and what are the moments that are the funniest? And what can we lose? And sort of not even miss it anymore. Like, what are we fine with? And, it's always hard to make those cuts, but in the end, I'm so grateful for that because I have read books too, where there's, you just know the writer's so funny, but you're also kind of exhausted by the wittiness of it. And I didn't want that to happen. So yeah, but I'm so glad you laughed. That makes me so happy.
And I think a lot of authors go through this process of, should I pursue traditional publishing or self-publish? How did you know which path you wanted to pursue for your novel to really make it bloom?
I think I had a few moments where I thought, should I self-publish? I really wanted to try traditional publishing. I wanted to see if I could make it. And not that one is better than the other. I mean, there are incredible writers who have self-published and are doing really well. I think for me, the learning curve on that to make it go really well felt sort of daunting. So I didn't want to wade into that territory yet, not because I felt like traditional is better than self-publishing. I'm really grateful that I'm with Zibby Books, which sort of, straddles a couple different worlds. They're an independent publisher, a small new publisher. They only publish 12 books a year. So each book that comes out is sort of like the lead title, and they get all the attention from the entire team. And, the team, there's a lot of really talented people working on the team. They're incredibly creative and innovative and willing to try new things. Like on the back of the cover is a QR code, and readers can go into bookshops and they can scan this code and go into this portal of all this information about me the book, fun quizzes, extra material. And it's just so engaging for the reader. And even if you're sort of just debating, like, do I want to buy this book or not? It kind of is a nice portal into deciding if this is the book for you. They were just willing to try that. Another thing that they're doing that's different is they release the hardcover and the paperback at the same time. And normally hardcover comes out first, and it's out for a year if you do hardcover, and then you go to paperback. And the team was sort of like, why? Why are we doing that? A lot of times hardcovers price people out, and they think to themselves, oh, I'm going to wait until the paperback comes out. And then they forget and they don't end up buying it. And so they said, we want to just meet readers where they need it and where they want it. So let's give both options, which I thought fantastic. So they're doing all sorts of innovative things. There's a really lovely camaraderie to all the authors. Many of us are on chats and texting each other and supporting each other as we go. Some authors have published before, others are new and have lots of questions. As my journey, yes, it took a long time, but if I had published earlier, I wouldn't be with Zibby Books. I wouldn't have met my editor. So it's like, it all worked out the way it was supposed to. And that feels really good.
Well, and I have to say, I'm so impressed. Like everyone at Zibby that I've talked to has been amazing. They're so sweet. And it was really cool because I actually got the audio version too, the audiobook version, because I was like, I got to hear this in audio now. So I listened to it in audio as well. And the founder of Zibby Books actually did a foreword. And I was so impressed because she said she really believed in this book and everything. I thought that was lovely. And that audiobook was amazing too. So,
oh, thank you. It was such a blast to choose the audiobook narrator. We had, I think, 7 auditions, and to hear this 5-minute clip read by all these incredibly talented narrators and how they would portray Joan and do the voice of Carmen. They were doing this scene where Carmen is getting her massage from Joan. I think it's chapter 3. It was so fun to hear, how everyone was making them come alive, and just, wow, like this is real. There were so many moments that felt surreal along the way, getting cover options, having this happen. The woman who narrates it is Marnie Penning. She's incredible. I'm so proud of her work. So I'm so happy to hear you say that because she did such a great job.
Kind of going back to what you were saying about like, it was the right time, the right place, finally, after all this long journey, the book itself is such a wonderful, nuanced approach dealing with grief throughout the novel. And now more than ever, I think grief is a really big part of people's stories, especially, given the last couple of years. Not all paths of heartbreak look linear and match up with societal expectations, which is established pretty quickly in the book and throughout. Like, why did you find it such an important thing to write about grief, burnout, and self-growth?
I think when we hear about heartbreak and a partner dying, it's often when a couple has been together for many years, and I wondered what it would be like to, Joan loses her boyfriend Samuel only 6 months into dating. The reader meets her 2 years later, and she's still feeling the grief of that. And I wondered what is it like to finally meet someone? We've got these 2 quirky characters, Samuel and Joan. They fall instantly in love. They see their paths unfolding. They've got all the emotions of new love. They don't even want to bring anyone into it. That they haven't met their families yet. They're just like so pumped to be together. And then Samuel dies. And Joan is left holding the bag and holding all of those emotions. And I'm sorry to Joan, but I was sort of like, I want to explore what that feels like. And there's a sort of double whammy because no one fully appreciates and knows their story. She doesn't get a real label as a widow, a fiance, a girlfriend of many years. She was just so new. So she doesn't get the recognition. Her grief doesn't get recognized. And she's sort of almost, her head is spinning like, did this even really happen? Giving her that pain allowed me to then turn to the art of writing and this idea, could I not only tell my story, but could I give my story to new characters, to fictional characters who stand in for us, and write the happy ending that we didn't have in a different way that feels fun and fresh and new? Because journaling about my grief, writing about our sad story is just too painful. So that's sort of where I went with it. And what I'm hearing from readers who are really appreciating that part is permission to grieve, no matter what the relationship time frame was, no matter how long you've been grieving for, no matter, I was talking to a woman the other day who was like, I met this person on a bus, so briefly, and then they died a few days later, and I never, stopped thinking about that person. And it can be just a tiny amount of time where someone really, touches your heart and impacts you. And to know that grieving that person comes in different forms and shapes and is okay. Like moving through grief is going to look different for everybody. So I wanted to kind of write about that.
Well, and I think you did it in such a beautiful and, like I said, a nuanced way that I just don't see too many people approach, especially with a short time frame, like you were mentioning. Like there's not a real label you can put on it, but all Joan knows is that it was a profound connection. Yes. And that she grieved for it and the future of what it could have been.
Yes.
And
yes.
that was something that I thought was so beautifully done, and just something we don't really talk about ever, and I know, especially in the workplace nowadays, you're kind of just expected to get over things like that and just be right back to it.
Yeah. Yeah. When I met my husband, we've been married for, he knows the math better than I do. I think 12 years. And when we met, we just knew right away. It was just like such a great connection. And 6 months into the relationship was quite a long time for us in some ways. We had already been through a lot. We had established a lot. We were really looking forward to the future, and that new love too, like so much is churning through you. And it's that time that's like never repeated, in a courtship. And had that ended for me, I would have been just in Joan's position. I would have been devastated, not being able to see that relationship through. So I kind of was able to cast that feeling into her, even though I hadn't experienced that sort of partner loss.
Yeah. And I love that you approached it with Joan also writing her own novel, because I think that's so true, especially now. I have had so many authors, like new authors, and talked to so many authors who are starting out who said like around 2020 was that time where they said, listen, if I'm going to get my hands on a keyboard and I'm going to write something out that feels cathartic to me, I better do it now. You kind of integrated it into your book, that as a big part of the plot was authors, I think really now, especially new authors, we're seeing it used as a form of catharsis for how they're feeling. And especially those who grieved a lot, I see that they are going into genres like romance to give themselves an happily ever after.
Yeah. Yeah. And I, just like I said for myself, there was a process for me to even say out loud, I think I want to be a novelist. It felt really absurd to say that, to give myself that label. And I kind of kept waiting for someone to tap me with it and to bestow it upon me. And Joan also goes through that process of, do I have to wait for someone's permission to call myself a writer? When can I say that I am? Is it in the act of writing? Is it when I gain some sort of, societal success or approval? And she's kind of contending with that. She also has this early love of writing that kind of gets tamped down for reasons that are explained in the book, and then begins to reclaim it for herself. And whether she's, aiming to publish a book or not, or what is this really going to look like in the end, that the act of writing allows her to say, like, this is part of my identity and I'm going to claim it for myself. And I hope, I've been hearing from readers who are saying, this is inspiring me to get back to writing and to say that this is what I do and what I love.
That's so awesome.
Yeah.
It's so awesome to hear that as like a writer.
Yeah, I
know. And you have this relationship building and aspects in the book that feels so detailed, with a lot of consideration and fleshed out to like those characters and how they interact with each other. It's encouraging to see support outside of the protagonist, where she can find her people and understand, that she does have the support system available to her. Was it always intended to include those relationships in your novel?
I really wanted to build a very quirky cast of spa characters around Joan, and the spa setting and the people who are drawn to work in it really, gave way to a lot of humor and funny, interesting characters. So it was always my intention to sort of build that around for her and to guide her to realizing, if I want this, I have friends and people who love me around me. And I now need to step toward it and embrace it, and then also do the work of being a friend, because people are extending themselves to me and I need to extend myself back. Part of the wonderful editing experience with my editor was taking each of these characters and really fleshing them out so that they weren't just one dimensional, just like, this character Lou, who's a body worker and very spiritual and, wears his vest open with, he's just like a feather necklace, but like, okay, those are funny things, but also what can we give to Lou that allows him to be other things, not just a joke, not just, like, how can we build his dimensions? So we did that sort of character by character. And then, that they were already in the book, but my editor was sort of like, okay, now let's build on them. What do they each love to do? What's outside of work for each of them? And some of that thinking and some of that writing doesn't ultimately even make it into the book. It's not a waste of time, just for emerging writers to hear that it's not a waste of time to write some of that stuff or to think about those characters in a deeper way, even if you don't use that content, because I think it does bubble up, it does come through, and it allows the characters to seem more real, that they're not just props. Like, I'm not just moving this character here so that my main character can experience this or this. Joan experiences a transformation over the course of the book, and it's hard to write a transformation. You can't just sort of say to your reader, Joan is transforming now. Joan's having a thought. So characters around her give her an opportunity to show transformation, whether it's her best friend Cher, who is giving her feedback she doesn't want to hear, and then she has to decide how to take that feedback, whether it's a new friendship bubbling up and she has to decide how to support that person or not. Those are opportunities that allow my readers to see Joan transforming without me just telling them that is happening, because no one wants to be told that. It's boring. It's so boring. But I love writing those characters. It was such a blast.
And it was so nice to see her realizing how integral they were to her, right? That they had been there to support her, even though, I think grief has us sometimes pushing people away, and how much they were there as her support system and to, help her.
Yes, exactly.
So It was, yeah. And I love that you mentioned too, that you used it as like a transformational piece to show her. Cause I did see that throughout the book. It was slow, it was steady, but you show her slowly accepting the way that, like at the Christmas party and things like that,
Yes.
wanting to stay and wanting to interact and see everybody and participate. And that is, I think that is a big step in the right direction. And then we saw her grow throughout, and it was beautiful transformation that you did. And of course, since we're on the topic of transformation, self-growth is a theme in the book. We love it. We love self-growth. As someone who has been on a harrowing journey bringing this novel to the masses, what's one of the self-growth moments you've had as an author?
Oh my gosh, there are so many. It's funny because I think we think once the book gets published, it's a party from here on out. And I hate to say it, but being on the other side and having your book come out, this entire experience is fraught with rejection as much as it's a celebration. And whether it's, an author who decided not to blurb your book, or you see a friend's book on a really incredible list of summer reads and you're not on it, or, the whole thing is a roller coaster of emotions. So all those little moments that are happening in the day to day allow these self-growth moments to be like, oh, that feels a little tender. But also this is an incredible experience, and connecting to gratitude for what's happening, not carrying a sort of scarcity mentality that, oh, that person has this, now I don't, that it's great for everyone. So those are places where I'm really having to go into my sort of own practice of gratitude. And I think even self-love, like this is hard, no matter if you're querying and getting rejections, or you're at a Barnes and Noble book signing and, 5 people come, it's, but then also the next day, incredible things happen. It's an up and down. So learning how to ride that journey in a steady way is something that I'm working on. And I think I'm just getting better at day by day. I guess that's my moment. It's happening now. It's happening, in these weeks as this is unfolding.
I think you bring up a great point. It's super important to know is that even when you have your book published out there in the masses, and it's readily available for readers, you've been, you've queried, you've done it, you finished that piece of it. There's still this a little bit of imposter syndrome almost. Like that you compare yourself to other people, or like it's there still of like questioning stuff, because I think a lot of authors in particular think once you get to that finish line of publishing, that's it, it's done, right?
Exactly.
Now it's the success. Now you get to ride the success. But then you see other friends, like I've seen several author friends who've gotten several books written out since I'm still working on mine,
Yes.
and gotten awards, or
Yes.
have gotten some kind of deal, whether it's with an agent or their audio rights or anything like that. And it's just, in some ways, I think it gets in our heads, but then they always tell you, what is the saying? Comparison is the thief of joy.
Yes. Yes.
So it's super
true.
important. Yeah.
It's true. And I think no matter what stage you're at in the writing, it's sort of connecting back to why you want to do this in the first place. And it's something my husband always helps me with in moments where I feel a little bummed by something, or this isn't, what I hoped it would be, or I'm getting rejected, when I was querying. He was like, look, you love to write, and I do. My best days are when I've touched the page in some way, even if it's been 30 minutes and, my kids are watching a show and I'm dashing upstairs and I can get out a few sentences. I feel like I'm a better partner and mom and person in the world. And it's not about, what list or the accolades. It's about my connection to the material and how that's feeding me and what that does for my day to day. So reconnecting with that, I think, is really important no matter what stage you're at.
Trust the process.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
trust the process. And I try to
That's so
remember
true.
to just enjoy this moment right now, right? For
Yeah,
what it is.
exactly. Exactly. Yep.
So we've talked so much about your lovely debut, Super Bloom. So where can listeners find your book and how can they connect with you?
I'm on Instagram at Meg Tady, and my website is megantady.com. And I'm on tour a lot of different places around New England and LA and Colorado Springs this summer, Vermont. And my book is everywhere books are sold.
Fantastic. And where's the best place to follow you? If like, because I know you might have another book coming out, right?
Yes. I sold my second novel to Zibby Books. It's called Champions for Breakfast. I believe it's coming out winter or spring of 2025. And follow me at Meg Tady, Instagram.